Hi, Scott here, and welcome. Thanks for watching. We're going to dive into how to start a record label right now. I hope you got a cup of coffee and a pen and a paper, and I'm excited for you to start your record label. Let's do this. Okay, let's dive in. How to start a record label, the complete guide. Before we get too far, I want to let you know that I've put together this toolkit, which includes a bunch of different free resources that you can download for free, all in one toolkit. You can go to otherrecordlabels.com/toolkit. What's inside? I've put a bunch of things that will help you when you're starting a record label. And don't worry, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty in a second. But we've got a marketing checklist, a how to start a record label checklist. I've put together a workbook that has some to-dos and some note-taking tools. I have some sample recording contracts. There's some social media templates. There's an accounting Excel sheet template that you can use. Go to otherrecordlabels.com/toolkit to download that. It's free. There's a link in the description below. You can grab that whenever. Okay, let's dive in. The first thing is picking a name. I mean, this is obviously you're doing this already in the back of your mind. That's the first thing most people do when they dream about a record label. But I want to give you a couple tips when you're picking a name. The first is you have to check for the username availability across all the social media platforms. This is really important because we might think, okay, I've got this great name for a label, but it's too long to go on Twitter, or it's not available on Instagram. Now, some of these things may not matter in 5 or 10 years or 20 years from now. They probably won't. But right now, when we're running a record label, it's really important to make it easy for fans to find us. And I think one of the ways to do that is to have the same username across all of your online platforms. And the reality is most people are going to discover our label and interact with our label online. And so we want to make sure that our Twitter username, TikTok username, Instagram username, and even our URL are all the same thing. So if your record label is called Candy Cane Records, then you want to check if Candy Cane Records is available all over these platforms. So keep it short and simple for that reason. Keep it unique. You can use a free website like Name Checker, or there's tons of other versions out there that will check all the platforms at once. And sometimes you'll realize, hey, this is too long, or this is taken on these accounts. And it actually might really limit your name options. I understand that, but I think it's really important. You want to take a second to research the trademarks and competitors. I'm not saying you need to register a trademark right away. This can be kind of a fun project and just dream through this project for a little while until you necessarily settle on a name and register the trademark. But before you use a name, just make sure it's not taken already. Now, you might go to a website like trademarkia.com and you might check the registration on a record label name, and you might realize that a vacation company in Hawaii is using your name, or there's a restaurant in Texas that is using that name. You might still be okay if you're a record label in a completely different industry. Now, you're going to want to talk to a lawyer about that, so don't take my word for it. But let's just check to see if there's any major trademarks before what you do. Also, test it in Google. See what comes up. See where you would rank. If you're going to come up with a label called Fork Records, you might be competing against the actual fork for a little while until you become more popular than the household fork. Now, pairing it with records is always a good thing. It's going to help you rank a little bit better in Google. So if you are Fork Records, you might have a little bit better chance because you're pairing it with that other word, records. But just see what it comes up. You might find yourself competing against some things that you don't want to be affiliated with. So just test it in Google. And then test it out in real life. This is one of the things I do all the time is I mock it up on a website. I get like a free trial from Squarespace and I test out the logo. I see how it might look in a URL. I also maybe even mock it up on some merch. If you have some designer friends, put your logo on a t-shirt or on a tote bag and say, does that look right? Put it on the back of a CD or an LP and say, does that look right? So make sure you test these out before you pick a name. Don't overthink it. Most people don't care what your name is. They're not going to get it. If it's a cute reference to something, they probably won't get it. They're here for your music, they're here for your aesthetic, and they're there for your artists. So don't overthink it. Now, I've just given you 4 ways of why you should overthink it. These things are kind of technical and important, but all things you can do within a half an hour. But when it comes down to it, don't send out a survey to all your bands and or all your friends and family. Just pick what feels right, what checks these boxes off, and move on. Okay, now you've got a name. Let's make it into a logo. So we want to make a logo, and I would say black and white is ideal. A lot of labels maybe want to come up with something colorful and unique and stand out, and that's cool. But make sure you have a black and white version. Most independent record labels that I know, and if you were to do a big Google search, you'll find that most of them have a traditional black and white logo. I love that. I love it because it really allows for the artists and for the releases on the label to be the prominent aesthetic design. It allows for those releases to stand out. The label just kind of takes a back seat because listen, what is a record label? It's a label. It's a label that goes on the record. So you don't really need to steal the show. I think black and white logo are the best, and you can have a colored version for different events or for special merch, but black and white's important. Hire a designer or an artist if you're not capable to sketch something up in Illustrator or Photoshop. And I love it even when people hand sketch something, as long as it can be converted to an EPS so that it can scale bigger on merchandise. A PNG file is something that has a transparent background. So if you ever want to put like a white version of your logo on a blue background, or on, let's say it's going on a mock-up of a t-shirt, or it's going on an actual 12-inch record, you want to make sure you have a version of it with a transparent background and a JPEG. Maybe even grab a CMYK version and an RGB version. Those are important because you're going to use this in a lot of different options. Hire a designer. You can find someone pretty cheap. If possible, come up with some brand colors and guidelines, maybe a brand color scheme. If I suggested using black and white, but if you are going to say, listen, everything we do is going to have a streak of red, or it's going to be black and white plus yellow or something like that, just make sure you identify what that yellow is, what that color is, and maybe create like a one-page document to say, hey, this is our brand colors. And you want to achieve brand consistency across the board. So create a document that outlines your brand guidelines and just say, listen, this is the motto or the slogan we use. This is the most important URL that should appear in all of the bios of all of the social media platforms. This is how the logo should appear. It shouldn't be cut off. It shouldn't be too big. It shouldn't be upside down or on an angle. Just create some sort of consistency, because that consistency will help establish you in the eyes and in the minds and soon to be the ears of your new fan base. Okay, now we're going to start to build our online presence. And like I said at the beginning, register all of your domains and usernames. So as soon as you've settled on a name and you know that it's available as a .com and as a username, please, as much as possible, try to get the .com as close to the username on Instagram and Twitter as possible. If it can be identical, then you're on your way. I love that. It's something I worked really hard at. In fact, I didn't get the .com that I wanted 10 years ago when I registered my label. I didn't even think to get it. I put music as a suffix and got .com. And then a couple years later, the actual .com of my short name was taken, and I was so mad. But I was able to get it a few years later on Twitter and on Instagram. So just make sure you can have consistency across the board, but register them all and keep them in your back pocket. Even if you're not ready to launch, it's okay to just sit on them for a little while. When we're building a website, we have to ask ourselves, what is the objective? How are people going to come here? What are they going to do when they come here? What do we want them to do? And so what does a website need? I think it's good. And now this doesn't have to be tabs across the top. It can really be this quick scroll, one-page system. But I think a good little bio is keep it short, but maybe tell the audience what type of music you're interested in, maybe your geographic location, maybe the heart and message behind why you started a label. It's always good to have artist roster to show that the artists that are on your label and link to their social media and to their own websites. I think the most important thing on a website is a quick link, or an embedded playlist or some sort of compilation that I can hear right away. When I go to a label, I discover a new label, I look at it and I think, wow, this looks cool. I want to hear the label right away. I won't want to go to Spotify and search their name and hope something turns up. Link me right away, or even better, embed right there on the page a Spotify playlist, or maybe it's SoundCloud or Bandcamp playlist with a bunch of your songs from various different artists on your label. so I can hear what your label sounds like right away. Don't make me search to find your music, because that's why I'm there in the first place. You can have a store selling merch or selling downloads through Shopify or Limited Run or whatever platform you're using, or Bandcamp. I think linking to your Bandcamp is really important. Bandcamp is one of the most popular platforms for indie labels, so make sure you link to your Bandcamp very clearly. Contact info if that's what you want, if you want to accept demos, if you want people to reach out to you, to engage with your artists, then include that probably in the bio. It doesn't need its own section. And social links down in the footer or up top, make sure that we can link to your Instagram and your Twitter, and if you have a YouTube page, something like that. I always love when I go to a label or an artist, I go to their Instagram quickly, because that's where I know I'm going to hear some samples of music, see their stories, see what their vibe and aesthetic looks like. I love going to somebody's Instagram. I feel like I can get more information there than necessarily on their website. Where do you get a website? Well, this is a big thing, and you might want to hire someone to take over things. There's, WordPress or custom sites that are done. But the quickest way that I see most labels and most artists going is with Squarespace or Wix, and doing something. I mean, I've even seen labels using the free Wix platform that has the Wix banner at top. Just do whatever works for you. Don't worry about it too much. And if you don't want to do an investment, if you don't want to make a label website right away, that's okay. Use Bandcamp. You could buy a domain name and have it redirect immediately to your Bandcamp page. That's totally fine. You could use Facebook. A few years ago, people would use a Facebook company page as their homepage, or even go straight to your Instagram. I've seen a label do that as well. They buy the .com and have it redirect immediately to their Instagram account. No big deal. When we define our label, we give ourselves some clarity and we help ourselves focus on what's important. So let's define our audience. What genre or subgenres do they like? What formats do they like? That's really important. Is if you're going to release cassettes, you have to know, does your audience appreciate cassettes? Do they understand cassettes and why it's important these days? Do they like vinyl? Are you going to invest $3,000 into pressing vinyl just to find out that your audience prefers to listen to music on Spotify, and then you're stuck with 300 or 400 copies of a record in your basement? How do they listen to music? Are they primarily discovering music on playlists on Spotify? Do they primarily support artists through Bandcamp? Or is it SoundCloud? Or is it YouTube? Where do they go to find out about new music? It's really important to define who your new audience is going to be, because this will help you find them and then communicate with them. Another thing we want to define is our goals. Let's outline our explicit goals. Let's say, how much income do you want to make in a year? And how much of that should be profit? Or let's say explicitly, we want our audience to grow on YouTube or Instagram, or an audience, a follower count on one of your artists. Or maybe we just want to say, listen, our goal is to sell 100 records, whether that's one record from 100 different artists, or that's we sign one artist this year and we sell 100 records, whatever. That's totally fine. Outline your implicit goals too. And now, when I say outline, I'm actually saying write these down. And by the way, when I give you that toolkit at the beginning, and I'll mention it again, otherrecordlabels.com/toolkit, there is a workbook in there. It gives you a spot to outline some of your goals. Implicit goals are kind of things you can't really touch, differently than, say, income coming in or records going out. But implicit goals are something like relationships and ethics and things that are meaningful and personal to you. And so you might say, my goals for this year, or for the first 5 years of my label, or for the first couple of months of my label, is to build relationships with artists, to give artists a champion in the industry, or in my town, to be someone in my city who is advocating for artists who you think aren't getting their day in the sun. So outline what your explicit and your implicit goals are. And it's also fun to outline your audacious goals. What is like one thing that you think would just totally blow your socks off, that would totally make you happy? Is it that a band that you love retweets one of your releases? Is it getting a Rolling Stone review or getting on Pitchfork? Is it selling 1,000 records or charting? Figure out what that is. Maybe it's something like getting on an editorial Spotify playlist. Or maybe it's just something, not so audacious, but something that's really meaningful to you. So let's outline those goals on all three of those categories of goals. I also like to create a mission statement. I think a 2 to 3 sentence statement that says who you are, why you exist, and what you aim to do. I think that's important. I think it's important for the bands that you sign. If they read that and they see that's something that you created ahead of time, then they can maybe get a little snapshot of what your goals are and what your ethics are and who you are as an individual and who you're going to be as a business partner. I think it's important for any volunteers or staff members that come on to your label eventually. And it's also important for fans and potential fans and for the press and the audience out there to see who you are and why your label exists and how your label is going to contribute to the music industry. Because do we need more artists? Do we need more labels? Do we need more releases? There's 30 or 40,000 songs that come out or new releases that come out on Spotify every single day. Do we need more of it? And so you need to kind of identify that in your mission statement and say, this is why we exist and this is why we need to exist. I think that's important to do, if only for yourself. Well, look at us. We're just totally motoring along here. Let's talk about signing new bands. Where do you find new bands? Where do you find a new artist? As soon as you started a record label, are they just going to come to you? Are they going to automatically find out about your new record label? I think one of the best thing to do is friends and friends of friends. When I first started, I signed myself to my own label. And, it didn't take much convincing to sign myself to my own label. But then the next thing was I signed my best friends. We were working on a record together in my home studio. And I said, hey guys, let's start a record label. I'll be an artist and you'll be an artist. And so that's how we started our record label. And then how it grew from there, and it grew really quickly, was one of the guys in my friend's band was also in a band with another guy. And then he was in a band with another guy. And we ended up just signing all of these bands, or maybe a little bit too many at once. But it all came through friends of friends. I love that because you're probably pretty close to being on the same page with some of those people, because if your friend is a friend with them, then it's pretty good chance that you guys are going to get along. So on a relationship level, I love that. I also have done these deep dives on Bandcamp, or you can do them on Spotify and SoundCloud, where these unsigned artists are who maybe don't have a ton of streams. You can search by geography, or you can search by genre or subgenre. I love doing this because we find these little hidden gems that nobody has heard, and we can reissue that record, or we can reach out to them, talk with them over email for the next couple of months and say, hey, let's work together on your next project. So that's where you can find bands, is by spending a day and just deep diving and researching. And then, of course, demo submissions. Once you get your website up and running, you can have a little portal or a little area. You can use submithub.com to allow people to submit demos to you for your consideration. And that can be a good way too. I've talked to a few labels that have signed bands through demo submissions. But I do think it's best for you to find them, for them to contact you. But demo submissions is an option. I would recommend, if possible, to use a guinea pig test artist. In fact, use your own band or a close friend's band as you learn the ropes, if that's possible. If that's not possible, that's okay. But using your own band is really great, because then you can make all of these mistakes on yourself and you can be forgiving, or your friend's band. At the very least, whatever your first band is, it's okay to be transparent up front and say, you know what? This is my first release. Here's my mission statement. Here's my goals. Here's what I hope to do. But hopefully they're easygoing with you and they have some modest expectations. So it's always nice to kind of test things out. At the very least, maybe just reissue one of your friends' records just so you can practice uploading to Spotify and to Bandcamp, and maybe even to making physical merch. Remember, managing these relationships is about managing expectations. If an artist thinks that you're going to let them enable them to quit their day job after a couple weeks of being signed to your label, you're going to need to deal with those expectations. Unless you're able to do that, congratulations. But some artists have some pretty crazy expectations because they really believe in their art, and they should. And they also may not be totally ingrained in the music industry like you are. They may not be going through a complete guide on how to start a record label. And so they may not know how difficult and arduous it is to start a record label and to be an artist on a new record label. So it's important to be honest with your artists and be transparent with them and let them know how difficult this may be and how much perseverance is going to be required. And if you guys come together and say, you know what, this first single or this first EP may not be the breakthrough. In fact, the third album may not be the breakthrough. But if it's the fourth album that's the breakthrough, then you guys want to be there together for that. And so be honest and transparent with them and be generous with them when you can, because they're going to come in and their backs are going to be up. They're going to feel nervous that someone's going to put their hands all over their precious art. You want to make sure that you're transparent with everything and that you're being generous to them, that you are giving them more than they expect. And I think that's one of the ways as a new label can do a great job and earn the royalties that they take from an artist is by over-delivering. Okay, contracts is tricky. I get asked about this a lot. And I'm not a lawyer, so please hire a lawyer. I've included a sample contract. The sample contract is in the toolkit, otherrecordlabels.com/toolkit. The link is below. Make sure you download it. Take a look at the sample contract and get an idea of what's in there. If you want a really robust and custom contract, then you're going to need to pay a lawyer to do it for you. It will cost you anywhere between $500 to $2,000, but you know that you'll be protected and the artist will be protected. I have seen, and I'm not giving any recommendations here, but I've seen labels go without a contract. I've seen them just use a handshake deal or putting some very loose terms in an email so that both parties see it. Your protection level decreases as your cost decreases. So we might say, okay, I'm not going to do a contract at all. We're just friends. We're going to keep it chill. And then it's not going to incur any legal fees. But the protection of you as a label, as a business, as an individual, and the protection of the artists drops significantly. But if you were to pay for a contract, it might cost you a lot of money, but your protections go up. So just keep that in mind. But I've provided a sample contract just so you can take a look at it. But there's different things in the contract, like length of contract or how many recordings are part of the contract. That's usually referred to it by the amount. But your lawyer or in the sample contract will explain some of this to you, and you'll get a better idea how it's going to work. Now, we talk about royalties and amount. Most independent record labels that I talk to are 50-50, meaning when you make $100 and let's say you deduct $20 of expenses, you're left with your net profit. We're going to dive into this a little bit deeper in a second. But most independent labels I talk to, the royalties are 50-50. Most mid-sized labels that are a little bit bigger, more established, they might take 60% for the label. And then when you're looking at major labels, they're taking 80% or higher, leaving only 20% for the artists. Keep in mind, most of the labels that I speak to that are modest and independent are 50-50. I love that because both parties, the artist and the label, have a 50-50 dog in the fight. I think that's really fair. And it's important for you as a label to earn your 50%. 50% of what? Let's talk about royalties. What are royalties? Well, first of all, we want to talk about net profit. Net profit is the total revenue minus the total expenses. So total revenue, number two, is streaming and downloads from Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, if that's still around, even physical sales that you might get in person or from record stores or Bandcamp. Maybe you're doing merch for the artists and you're selling that at events or through your online store. You take all of this revenue and then you minus your expenses, oftentimes called recoupables, stuff like production costs, like mastering, photography, videographers, or artwork and design. There can be manufacturing costs if you pay to make CDs or press vinyl or duplicate cassettes. Then there's publicity costs like hiring a publicist or just paying for Facebook ads or Instagram ads. You take all of those total expenses, you subtract them from your total revenue from all of your plays and streams and downloads, and then you're left with your profit. So when we talked previously about labels who split the royalties 50-50, they're often splitting it off after the net profit. How do you pay those royalties? Pick a schedule, make it monthly, quarterly, or yearly, and send a royalty report even when there are no earnings due. And remember, going back to our relationship and expectations, transparency is key. Let's talk about marketing. On social media, it's important to be consistent. Use a strategy that is sustainable. I think it's really important to say, okay, if we're going to do a behind-the-scenes YouTube video of our label every week, you need to kind of figure out how long does it take to film, how long does it take to edit, and you need to determine, is this something that we can afford to do, that we have the time to do weekly? Can we batch record so that we do a month all in one day? How is this going to work? I think it's really important to be consistent when you're starting to plan, okay, let's upload a quote once a week onto our Instagram. Do things that are sustainable. So often I see record labels that when a band is coming out with an album, they have like 3 posts a day, and then it's like silence for 2 months. I think it's really important to try to keep up to date. They say that it takes 7 interactions from a customer or a potential customer with your business before they make a purchase. And so don't be scared of overwhelming your audience or annoying your audience on social media. All social media is annoying. So if you're posting every day or you're promoting a record every day, as long as you do it in a different and unique way, there's no harm in being consistent and even being repetitive. That's all right. Email marketing is something that is often overlooked because email's been around for so long. We kind of forget how impactful it is, but it's fantastic. I think it's important for you to build a mailing list for your record label and even build separate mailing lists for each artist. Collect emails at shows, or you can get them through your online sales like on Bandcamp or on Shopify or Squarespace. If you collect an email when somebody makes a purchase, then you have those emails. You can also use lead magnets to grow your list. So let's say you give away a free compilation download, or maybe you provide access to a behind-the-scenes portal where you guys post videos from the bands, that kind of thing. You can use requested email in order to give the fans download for that and then use those emails for your mailing list. I think it is great to create a separate list for artists because there will be people who will love your label and will love everything you put out, but it's also great to slowly build a mailing list for your artists so that monthly or weekly, but monthly is sustainable, that they can connect with their fans and tell them what's up. Local marketing is really cool too. Physical posters, putting those up on construction site walls or telephone poles, local media and newspapers. It's important for the bands and for the label to celebrate your local community, celebrate your country, your region, your culture. I think that's really important to make sure you're marketing in real life. I talked about this when we talked about our website, but a label compilation is so important. And in fact, it's actually how most labels got started back in the 90s. They would put together a CD with like 20 different songs, and not always were they even artists on their label. But I think at the very least today, it's important to build a label playlist, some sort of compilation. It's like a taster, and you can do it on a Spotify or Apple Music playlist, or you can upload everything as one album on Bandcamp. For me as a fan, when I discover a new label on Instagram, I want to click through right away, ideally to Spotify, so I can start discovering the artists on their label. So make it super easy for new fans to discover your music by creating a Spotify playlist or some sort of digital playlist that they can find and listen to your music. Add your label artists, add friends or similar artists if you don't yet have a ton of artists on your label. I mean, obviously, if you've only signed 2 or 3 artists, then that compilation is only going to have 2 or 3 songs, but that's okay. If it's a playlist, try to update it weekly and monthly. I mean, update it with new artists that you discover who aren't even on your label. And one of the things we see all the time is creating a compilation, maybe a yearly or a seasonal compilation on CD, on vinyl, on cassette, maybe just digital on Bandcamp. that can be really, really impactful and a great way to grow your audience. If you're including artists who are not on your label on this sampler, then they're going to share it with their audience. So if you have a sampler with 20 tracks on it, or even just 10 songs, then you have 10 different artists who are going to share it on their social platform. It's an incredible way to grow your audience. Now let's shift our focus to releasing music. Now that you've signed a band, you've designed a beautiful album cover, and you've pressed it to vinyl, and you're ready to release this music, let's talk about this process. And the most important thing and the biggest key to success is giving yourself time, allowing a long lead time, a long runway, as much time as possible. From what I've seen, singles should have 1 to 2 months. Now, what does that mean? That means from when you get the masters in hand, the finished product. Don't announce a release date when the band is still recording in the studio. Singles, 1 to 2 months. Albums should be 4 to 6 months. I know that sounds crazy, but I'm telling you, the more time that you have to allow for roadblocks, potential problems with recording and mixing and mastering and manufacturing, as well as giving the press generous lead time, is huge. Work backwards from your chosen release date. So you take a release date, and then you say, okay, this is ideal. It's in 8 months from now. We really want it to release at the end of September, during back to school, during the fall, when we have a captive audience. And so you work backwards from there, and you say, what do we need to have accomplished in August in order to meet our September goal? Then what do we need to have accomplished in July and June, so on and so on. When you build an album campaign, the first thing you can do is collect all of your assets that you're going to use to promote this album. And you're promoting the record a few months before it comes out. You're promoting it heavily on the day and the week that it comes out. And then you're also working hard to promote it on the weeks, months after it comes out. 3 or 4 months after an album comes out, it should not be dead to you. It should not be dead to the world. It's still a new album. It still has new listeners to connect with. So collect all of your assets, like photo shoots, great photos from great photographers, behind the scenes videos of them in the studio and photos of them in the studio, album cover, album artwork, product shots of the cassette or the vinyl. You can do singles, multiple lead-up singles. You can do B-sides, acoustic versions, music videos, live performance in a living room or outside or at a venue. Take all of these assets and collect them in a folder, and then distribute them throughout the entirety of the campaign. And work on your plan with the artist from the very beginning, and write out a list of objectives and goals. Because an artist might say, listen, my only goal is to make our money back on recording, or my only goal is to get covered by Rolling Stone or Pitchfork, or my only goal is to make sure my existing fans enjoy this piece of music, or maybe their only goal is just to release the music to the world and say they've done that. So make sure you write out your list and their list of objectives and work together, meet weekly and monthly as the album date approaches to see how you're doing. Picking a release date is kind of important. You want to avoid holidays and major events. Consult with the artist first, make sure it's a good time for them, and pick a release date so far in the future to provide you with that generous lead time that I was talking about. You may have heard the term music publicist. This is a third party. They're oftentimes not affiliated with the label, or they don't work for a record label, although most labels or larger size labels do eventually develop an in-house publicity team. But when you hire a third party publicist, their job is to reach out to the press, to blogs and to magazines and websites, and to try to promote your record. If you want to hire a publicist, you want to find out who has worked on your favorite recent releases, because they're going to be in the same genre as you. You can budget between $500 and $5,000. You really get what you pay for. And one thing I've found is that if you do hire a publicist, make sure you work as hard as them so that you're doubling your efforts. Because if you're doing your own in-house PR, which means you're promoting your releases by yourself, and a lot of small labels start that way. It took me maybe 6 or 7 years before I finally hired a publicist, and I still do releases where I do the music publicity myself. But the times where I do hire a music publicist, it's great to work just as hard as them, promoting the record as well, assuming I'm not stepping on their toes, then doubling the efforts when promoting this release. When you send your releases to the press, going back to why it's important having a long lead time, timelines are really important. If you can send them approximately 2 months prior for an album, maybe 1 month prior for a single, that gives them time to listen to it, to determine if it's right for them. I mean, a lot of editorial teams for big websites have and especially with magazines that are print, they have their schedule planned out months ahead. Spotify editorial team, they like to have the single or the album a couple of months ahead of time as well. So make sure you plan for that. It's important to build a press list, consult your artists to see if they have any contacts that have been friendly to them in the past. Ask other peers and maybe even ask other labels that you know if they have any contacts that they can share. But it's more important to maintain an up-to-date press list and maybe even a spreadsheet where you put some notes in there, their contact information, and you say, this person a year ago wrote a great review about one of our albums. And so then when you're emailing them, you can say, hey, by the way, thanks for writing about that album last year. We really appreciated it. Here's our next release. And you can even create a press one sheet. This is kind of an older fad that I don't know is as common in the digital world, but it's nice to have. It's an emailable PDF, a one sheet, meaning one page, and it's a centralized location for all of your releases' pertinent information. So that would be a tiny little bio that the writer can copy and paste. You could say things like, if you like this artist, then you will like this artist. You can put the track list, the release date is important to have, their genre, their hometown, your label information, the album cover, the artist's social media links, and maybe contact details for yourself. So that's something to consider. What about uploading the music to Spotify and to Apple Music? Let's talk about this as quickly as possible. This will be kind of like an at a glance because it's obviously a huge topic, and there's some other videos that you can find out about this. You may hear the term DSPs. That's referring to a digital service providers, and that would include Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Tidal. How do you get your music onto those platforms? Well, there's 3 tiers of distribution that I've seen. The most common is the DIY artist label method, which is basically using an aggregator like CD Baby, DistroKid, TuneCore, 3Tone is a new one, and using one of these platforms to upload your music, and you pay a fee. Sometimes they take a cut. Sometimes they have a one-time fee. Sometimes they have an annual fee. I've also seen a second tier, which is a little bit higher, and it's invite-only distributors like The Orchard, AWOL, 1RPM, and you have to apply, and they may not accept you, and they probably take a higher cut. There may not be a setup fee. There may not be an annual fee, but they may take a higher fee, something like 15 to 20%. And then the third tier is retail distribution that it also includes digital distribution. And we see that with Red Eye or Secretly. And that's also on an application level. So you can't just sign up for them. You have to kind of submit for consideration. But as a small label, I think it's really good to build off of one of those popular aggregators like CD Baby or DistroKid. And you can do the research on those to find out what works best. You're going to need, and a lot of these aggregators will provide you with barcodes, and that identifies the album as a whole or the single or the EP. And then the ISRC, which stands for International Standard Recording Code. And that's a code given to each song. So if you have a 10-song album, you have one barcode and then 10 ISRCs. And so these codes are given to a song so that if your song appears on a compilation later on, and so it can attribute the correct amount of streams, and of course the royalties go to the right place. So it's like a barcode, but for a song. Now, one other thing I'll throw in here, you may ask, why can't I just upload my music directly to Spotify? Why do I have to go through DistroKid or through CD Baby? Well, not too long ago, Spotify actually trialed this. They had artists upload themselves to Spotify. And then abruptly, a few months later, they canceled the program. And so now it's not possible for artists to upload their music directly to one of these platforms. I'm not sure why. even when it was allowed to, it didn't really make sense because if you wanted your music on Amazon or Apple Music, which are also very popular, or there's some other platforms in other countries that may not be popular to you, but are popular to those countries, you would have to submit separately to those. So you would still need someone like CD Baby or TuneCore or DistroKid. At this moment, it's not possible to upload directly. It's better to use one of these people, even though they take a cut or they cost for you, because they will format the album properly for hundreds of music platforms. There are some free alternatives. So if you're starting out and you can't afford an annual DistroKid fee or the cost, the setup fees on CD Baby, then you can use Bandcamp, and that's essentially free. They do take a cut. They take 15% of your digital sales, but it's free to upload something, and you can upload it for free and offer it as a free download if you want. Same with SoundCloud, although there's fees increasing with that. And then you can also be a physical-only label. I've seen this done very rarely, and it's kind of cool. It has its own vibe, where a label will only do 7 inches, or they'll only do vinyl, or they'll only do cassettes, and they won't offer a digital alternative. It's not hugely popular with fans, but it is kind of cool, and it's an option. Moving right along, when you are interested in manufacturing physical product, and that's still heavily supported, CDs are still a thing, and I believe they're going to come back soon. You can expect to pay $2 to $3 each when you're getting a manufactured run of CDs. You should be within 50 as a minimum, I think, but it's usually between 100 to 500 copies, especially if you want to get that cost per unit down. And it may take approximately a month to have the manufacturing done. Vinyl is different. Vinyl is quite expensive. Usually their minimums are 100. The sweet spot is between 200 and 300 copies. And you can get the price down to $7, but it's between $7 and $15 each if you're getting the full jacket and a color vinyl and a heavy vinyl. Approximately 3 to 4 months, although recently plants have been overwhelmed again, and they're much closer to 6 months lead time now. So you want to plan accordingly. And this goes back all the way to the beginning when I said that it's important to have a long lead time with your releases, because something like vinyl could take 4 to 6 months. And so you need to get the masters in hand and send it off to the pressing plant immediately to allow for problems in the test pressing or with the artwork. Cassettes are popular, and they're between $3 or even less if you're doing it yourself, upwards of $8 if you go really low quantities, like 25 copies. But you can go really low with cassettes, and the turn time is about a month as well. I want to give a final note on how to survive as a record label, because it's really tough. And I think one of the things to remind you is to ask for advice. Don't be afraid to reach out to labels that you admire. I've heard this done before with really big labels, that they're open to emailing back and giving some advice. There's not a ton of competition in this industry, which is really nice. You can talk to industry experts. Don't forget, if you're pressing vinyl or you're pressing CD or cassettes, the sales rep, they work for you. And they're very passionate about indie music. So talk to your vinyl manufacturers about different advice on how do I ship these, or how much is it going to cost me? Or do you have any advice on how to sell these? Same with radio promoters, college radio stations, indie record stores. Go into the local record store, buy a record, and chat up the owner and get some advice and tell them you're starting a record label. You can also talk to veteran artists and artists who have been DIY for a long time, or venue promoters. It's important to be kind, patient, and generous. I can't emphasize that enough. I know it's a little bit mushy, but it's important to be kind to your artists, be kind to your customers and your fans, and be patient and be really generous. Over-deliver at every level. I talked about over-delivering when we were talking about your relationships with the artist, but you should over-deliver with your audience, over-deliver with the press. Only work with good people. That should be obvious, but don't sign a band because they have great numbers, but maybe you don't get along with them. Also, stay organized, and stay organized from the beginning. I've provided you with tons of resources. I'm going to give you a link again, but try to stay organized and take your time and go slow. Here's a great quote. People overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. So don't think you need to get everything done in the first year. Don't think that how you are on launch day is how you're going to be as a label 6 months from now, or 10 years from now. You are constantly growing and constantly evolving. If you've gone through this and you want more and you want to go a bit deeper and you're ready to take this to the next level, I have created a course called How to Start a Record Label, the complete course. And I have 6 different modules plus 2 bonus modules. And I've also included some extra resources that you don't get in the toolkits. If you want to find out about this, go to otherrecordlabels.com/courses. We go really deep on the topics that we skimmed over today, and we break things down a lot more granular on how to start a record label. So if that's you, if you're ready for the next step, if you want more advice and more practical applications, then go to otherrecordlabels.com/courses. Don't forget, otherrecordlabels.com. Our free toolkit is a great way to get started. I hope you have found this helpful. I hope that you've had a notepad out and a cup of coffee and that you've been going through this. This will help you launch your label. I'm excited for you. Check out our course at otherrecordlabels.com. Thanks for watching.